There's a question from Paltalk here, a question to do with the issue of the Salaf refuting the Jahmiyyah and refuting the Mu'tazila on certain issues, and the fact that we see people in our times who are involved in da'wah work, and these people haven't really studied the Aqidah of the Salaf. They don't really grasp the Aqidah of the Salaf, and many of them, they come from backgrounds that are very similar to the backgrounds of those people who entered into Islam in the early times, and they brought their baggage with them. They brought their baggage with them into Islam. And with that baggage, they began to enter, incorrect beliefs and ideas into Islam. So the brother is asking that, these people who are arguing with atheists, can you bring an example of a discussion that the Salaf had with the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila on issues similar to those discussed today? Well, the greatest example that can be given is the issue of the Quran being the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran being the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it gets a bit complicated here, but obviously to answer the question, we have to bring in many different things. So, first of all, let's just say that, how can we put it? Right. First point is that all of this way of thinking of the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris and Maturidis, and likewise these people who are present today, your Hamza Tsotis, your Abdurrahim Greens and your Adam Deans and all these other people who are involved in arguing with the philosophers and trying to prove Allah exists, then they are basically using the language and terminology of or the conceptual baggage, that's probably the right word, the conceptual baggage of a man called Aristotle, even though they don't understand it and they don't realize it. And this man, he looked at the creation and he said everything in the creation is either a body, meaning a thing, a substance, or it can be 9 different attributes of that substance, right? So he said things like space, location, time, position, and whatever else. And from those things was that the thing is acting or being acted upon. Acted or being acted upon, right? Fi'l wa infi'al. It is being acted upon or it is acting, right? So he said that these are things or signs that something is created. Right? These are signs that something is created. That something acts or is being acted upon. Or something is in a place or a location or whatever else. So anyway, from this terminology, along came the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. And with this poison in their mind, because they were mixing in the Muslim lands with the Jews, the Christians, the Sabaean star worshippers, the Hindus and other than them. And from them, they had already been affected by this language and conceptual baggage of Aristotle. Then they looked in the Quran and they said, hold on. We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created the creation, then He made istawa. Right? So He didn't act after He created the creation. Or that Allah speaks. Allah spoke to Adam alayhi salam, then He spoke to Moses, then He spoke to Muhammad, then He spoke to Ibrahim. So these are actions that are taking place one after the other. This means that Allah must be changing in His state or in His essence. Allah is undergoing change. Right? Allah is undergoing change. And if Allah is undergoing change, then this means Allah must be created too. Allah must be hadith, muhdath, brought about. Why? Because there are actions that Allah is doing. Right? Where is this idea coming from? From the language of, from Aristotle's explanation of everything we see in the universe. That if something, is in a place, or it is mentioned in relation to time, or it is said to be doing something, or something is being done to it, it's a body that came to be after not being. Right? So you see that fikr now is coming into the fikr of these people. And so then, once they got poisoned with this way of thinking, they thought, how can we start arguing against the atheists to prove that Allah exists? And then they came up with this false proof This proof is the same proof that these people are using today. Right? So anyway, to cut a long story short, this proof basically assumes that this creation is the very first creation that ever came to be. And all events go back to one point in time, which is when this creation began to exist. And so before that, there was no space, there was no time, there was nothing, whatever else. And then this creation came to be, then there was space, then there was time, whatever else. Right? And so this proof means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therefore has to be different in every single way from whatever we see in this creation. Right? So this is where they began to deny Allah has attributes. Right? This is when they began to deny Allah is above the creation. This is when they began to deny that Allah speaks. Right? Why? Because if Allah speaks, if Allah is above the creation, right? If Allah made istiwa over the throne, this means, oh my gosh, Allah is acting. Allah is subject to time. Oh my gosh, Allah is above the throne. He's located in space, according to the way Aristotle explained things. Therefore, He must be confined in space and He must be a body. This is kufr. Right? So then they began to deny some of the major symbols of Islamic belief. They denied Allah exists above His throne. They denied that Allah will be seen in the hereafter. Why? Because seeing things in a direction is what we see in this creation. I see the book in that direction. If I'm looking in a direction means there must be a space. If there's space, that means the book must be occupying space. If it's occupying space, there must be a body. Right? And then they start to apply the same reasoning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I say Allah is above the heavens, above His throne, as is what the Quran says, it must mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is confined in space. Therefore Allah cannot be above the throne and He's free of time and space. You see the language? Free of time and space? That's the same language that we see these people using when they argue with the philosophers of today, because they've accepted the underlying terminology and conceptual baggage that those philosophers are using when they think in their minds of things. So, but the example I gave to you was the Quran. Why did they deny the Quran is the speech of Allah? Why? Because if you speech is something that you do successively. Words are successive. Right? So we see in the Quran, don't we see in the Quran, Allah says, Alif, Lam, Mim, Dhalikal Kitab, Allah Rayba Fih, and so on and so forth. The Quran, these are successive words, and Allah spoke them. So their argument is that if Allah spoke words which are in succession, this means Allah is subject to events. Allah is subject to things taking place in Him. And these are only the qualities of created things, not of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, the Quran cannot be the speech of Allah, it is something created. Right. Now the Salaf, when they refuted this, like Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, they made a statement and they said that indeed Allah, inna Allah yatakallam bima yasha wa kayfa yasha. And likewise they said, Inna Allah lam yazil mutakalliman idha sha. That Allah has never ceased, lam yazil mutakalliman, as one who speaks whenever He wills. What is the meaning of this statement? This means that Allah has eternally been one who speaks as and when He wills. Right? So Allah can speak whenever He wills. This does not mean that Allah is created in a body just because He speaks different things, to different, that He speaks to Adam, then He speaks to Musa, and then He speaks to Muhammad, and then He will speak on Yawm al-Qiyamah. These are different speeches that Allah does. And this does not mean that Allah is created because, events are taking place in Him, as what the Jahmiyyah say. So when the Salaf said, Lam yazil mutakalliman idha sha, Allah does not cease to speak as and when He wills. This statement is actually a refutation of these people who assume that this was the very first creation that came to be, and Allah was doing nothing for eternity before that. Allah wasn't speaking, Allah wasn't acting, Allah wasn't creating, Allah wasn't, This statement of Imam Ahmad is actually a refutation of that claim, and this is something that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah discusses in his books, in Ta'arud al-Aql wal-Naql, and likewise in throughout his books, Minhaj al-Sunnah and many of his different books, that he raises this issue, that this statement of Imam Ahmad is a refutation of those people on this specific issue. And likewise he mentions a tafsir of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, to the verses in the Quran in which Allah says, for example, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. He mentions the word وَكَانَ اللَّهُ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَزِيزًا حَكِيمًا. Right. This verse means that Allah was ever in eternity one who is Aziz, mighty, and Hakim, all-wise, and forgiving and merciful. Right? So this tafsir has come from Ibn Abbas, that all of these verses, they are in reference to Allah has never ceased being like this. Which means that because some of these names that are mentioned in these verses, Ghafoor, okay, they are muta'addi. Muta'addi means that they require an object for their meaning to be completed. Right? So if Allah has never ceased being one who shows forgiveness, then it means by implication that there must have been one to whom forgiveness was shown or is shown. So this is a proof to show that the argument of the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Ash'ariyah and the Maturidiyah who claim and say that the only creation that Allah created is this creation, and it is impossible for there to be creations before that. Right? In other words, it's impossible for there to be an endless chain of events in the past. Right? This is a refutation of those Jahmiyyah who make that assertion. We say that it is permissible for there to be an endless chain of events in the past. Why? Because Allah is eternal. His attributes are eternal. And therefore it's possible that He created things. And because He's eternal, then it's possible that in eternity there are things that Allah created, all of which had a beginning in time. You know, they weren't eternal, but they began after not being. Right. So the Jahmiyyah denied this and they said, an endless chain of events in the past is impossible. Right? So the saying of Ibn Abbas in his tafsir of those verses and the saying of Imam Ahmad with respect to Allah's speech is a refutation of those people. Now coming to today, these same people, Hamzat Sotsis, Aira, Abdul Rahim Green, all these people who are upon this way, they also are saying a statement which is actually the statement of the Jahmiyyah, but it's said in a different way. What they are saying is that the idea of infinity is absurd. That infinity does not exist in the real world. This is Hamzat Sotsis. He writes this in his papers. He uses it in his arguments. And this is the mother of the foundations of the Jahmiyyah. This is the saying of Jahm bin Safwan. That an endless chain of events in the past is impossible. And he also said an endless chain of events in the future is impossible. What does that mean? It means that at some time in the future, paradise will perish. And everybody in paradise will perish. Why? Because to have an endless chain of events in the future is impossible. Right? And likewise, endless chain of events in the past is impossible. Whereas we say, Allah is eternal, His attributes are eternal, and in the future Allah will always provide the people of paradise with rizq. Right? Because the people of paradise will be eternal. And Allah will always provide them with rizq. And this, in fact, there's 2 ayahs in the Quran which establish that as well. But what Jahm bin Safwan was saying was he was denying the endless chain of events in the past or the future. Why? To allow him to make this argument to prove Allah exists to the atheists. A false argument with a corrupt argument to prove Allah exists, which leads to actually denying Allah's names, attributes and so on and so forth. So he said, endless chain of events in the past is impossible. These people today are saying, there's no such thing as infinity. Infinity is absurd. And then they're going to the books of the philosophers, of today's philosophers and scientists, and they're quoting so-and-so philosopher said in his book that the idea of infinity is absurd, and this is whatever. This is the asl and the foundation of Jahm bin Safwan. And because of their jahl of these issues, they are arguing like those Jahmiyyah did and the Ash'aris did. Like Ibn Taymiyyah says, that these people, they went to argue with the atheists, but they came with a flawed tool. They used a flawed tool. They used a tool that was wrong. And as a result of that, they did more harm to Islam than they did any good. And so what we're seeing here today with these people is a repeat of the same thing. There's nothing new that they're bringing. It's all the same thing. And you see that the atheists who are refuting them with sound reason. And that's why when the atheists, when they come and they look at these people using these arguments, then they think Islam is backward. Right? So now it actually has an impact upon Islam itself. Right? So what these people are doing is very wrong, and it's from their jahl, from their ignorance, and we fear for the average people who are looking at these people have money, they have wealth, they are very active in what they do, they go around the country, they call people, they try to teach them these things, and these poor people, they're drawing into their net and saying, we'll teach you in 2 hours to become a da'i, to go and start giving dawah on the streets of Middlesbrough, wherever else it is. This is ridiculous, it's stupid. And there's a video where they have a group of people gathered together, we're going to teach you to give dawah. Right? And these people, we're going to give you a session of 2 hours, how to give dawah and how to take a shahada. This is not how you give dawah. It's not how you call average people to get involved in things which are going to put them to tribulation. Because, when you start speaking to people on the streets, they come with these shubuhat and these doubts. And you can't just tell people a formula to say this and say this and this without having any fahm, any understanding, any study. This is dangerous, and that's what these people are doing. And it's wrong, it's very wrong. So that's the answer, there's your answer. The answer is that from the Salaf, the saying of Imam Ahmad, لم يزل, that إن الله لم يزل متكلما إذا شاء. Allah never ceased to be one who speaks whenever He wills. Which means in eternity He was speaking as and when He wills. And by this is a refutation of the claim of Jahm bin Safwan. An endless chain of events in the past is impossible. And likewise, the explanation of Ibn Abbas of all of those verses that we mentioned in the Quran would say وَكَانَ اللَّهُ, and it mentions 2 names of Allah. There are many verses, there may be about 35, 40 different verses in the Quran which are actually like that. And they mention many different names. Azizan, Hakima, Ghafur Rahima, and many, whatever. That itself is a proof that Allah is eternally like that. And that again is a refutation of that foundation of Jahm bin Safwan. So, the important lesson we should take, ya ikhwan, is that we're living in times when there are, the ways and means of communication have become very easy for everybody. Like in centuries ago, you had just the press, the books, right? You had to have, there were only specialists who could write books, right? So writing books wasn't for everybody. It was for the elite people, right? Then in the 19th century, still in the 19th century, the common people didn't actually read. Reading was just something that the elite people did, even as far as the 19th century in even European countries, right? Then came the industrialization, the mechanics and everything, which made it easy for press and newspapers. Then it started coming into the hands of the common people, right? And the common people started reading. Then came the era of radio and broadcasting. Then came cinema and, whatever else. Then came TV in the houses. Then came telephony. And now we have basically the internet and the web and wireless, and every single individual in his hand, in his pocket, he's got access to the entire dunya, and tens of thousands of people in an instant, in a second. Right? And because of that, and because we have that reality, and at the same time we have the fact that every single sect that's ever appeared is still present. No sect, okay, there are some sects who've kind of disappeared. There are some which have basically gone away, they're not really there. But every single major sect, Jahmiyyah, present. They just come with different names. They're the Ash'aris, they're the Jahmiyyah. Mu'tazila are present. Rafida Shia are present. The Batiniyya, Rafidi Shia Batin, they are present. Every sect you think of, it has a manifestation which is present today. You have modernists, rationalists, you have all these different people. Now, that means that when a poor Muslim, comes into this world and he's, grows up and he wants to practice Islam, then what is he faced with? He's faced with absolute confusion. And he's assaulted from every direction because of this mass communication and the device he has in his pocket and in his hand. Everywhere he's bombarded by this organization and this individual and this person and this course and this lecture and this whatever else. So, utter confusion. And so, when you have these people who are present, all of these people who are present, some of them are trying to, call atheists to Islam. Some of them are trying to topple the rulers and establish justice. Some of them are trying to make Islam to be modern and to fit with the times. Some of them are claiming to, call for Muslim women's rights. Some of them are trying to, water down Islam because they don't want to be seen as extremists and whatever. All of this is taking place. There's lots of people out there who are doing all these different things. And a Muslim comes along and he, wants to practice Islam, and so he's being assaulted. His mind is a battleground for all these different people, right? Which shows that if a person, doesn't learn and get his things in the right order, the Tawheed of Allah, the Aqidah as it should be properly understood and whatever else, then he's just like, you throw something on the ocean, and then if the waves go this way, it'll go that way, and if the waves go that way, it'll go that way, and if the waves go this way, it'll go that way, and his life will just remain confused and, nothing, firm that holds him down, like the anchor holds it down. So, we, inshallah, finish with those remarks. And inshallah we'll finish the rest of the discussion inshallah on this in the next lesson. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.